Would you have survived the Ice Age? The question is simple, but the weight behind it is crushing. Would you have survived? Not in the world of central heating and supermarkets. Not in cities glowing against the night. But on an endless sheet of ice, with nothing but fire, stone, and the fragile strength of your body. The night around you is absolute. Not the quiet dark of a room, but a suffocating black that seems alive, pressing in from all sides. Each breath cuts like glass in your lungs. Your fingers are split open, raw from the cold, aching as if they no longer belong to you. Beneath your feet, the ground shifts and groans. It is not earth. It is ice, restless, creaking, spreading further than your eyes can see. And in the distance, a sea waits. Not a calm sea, but a wound in the world. Black, endless, rimmed with jagged ice that drifts and shatters with hollow thunder. Behind you lies famine. Before you lies the sea. The choice is not survival or comfort. It is survival or extinction. And yet, against every impossible obstacle, our ancestors went forward. They crossed that sea. They endured the Arctic. They carved out a life where the planet itself seemed determined to erase them. This is not just history. This is your inheritance. And tonight, you will walk their path. This is disturbing tale. Imagine yourself there, at the edge of the world. The year is not written in any book, because books do not yet exist. It is 30,000 years ago, or perhaps 20, perhaps more. The Earth has sunk into its last great freeze, a world scientists today call the last glacial maximum. Sheets of ice 2 miles thick stretch from the North Pole, pressing down continents, remaking mountains. Forests shrink to skeletal groves. Grasslands wither into frozen plains. The world is quieter than ours, yet the silence is monstrous. Every breath, every step, is a rebellion against extinction. The temperature is not simply cold. It is hostile. At night, the air drops to levels that strip life from flesh in minutes. Your clothing is not Gore-Tex, not wool, not synthetics tested in laboratories. It is animal skin, scraped by stone, stitched with tendon, stiff from freezing blood. Fire is your only companion, but fire is fickle here. Wind devours it. Snow buries it. A careless ember can mean death. And yet, our kind endured. Not once, not twice, but for thousands of years. In that darkness, they did not merely survive, they adapted, they innovated, they spread. You and I are proof of their victory, every cell of our blood carrying echoes of their struggle. But survival was not just about enduring the cold. It was about navigating terror. Imagine the hunger, the ache that gnaws without end. Food is not grown, not stored, not purchased. It is hunted, chased across icy plains. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, bison, beasts as dangerous as they are necessary. To kill one is triumph. To fail is starvation. Children cry from emptiness, their faces pale in the firelight, their ribs visible beneath skin. Each hunt is a gamble where the stakes are life itself. Now imagine the sea. That black wound on the horizon. For some, it meant death, the end of the world. But for others, it was the beginning. It was across such seas that humans reached places no footprints had ever marked before, Siberia, Alaska, and the Americas beyond. They built rafts from driftwood and bone, lashed together with rawhide, sealed with animal fat. They stepped onto water that shifted and cracked beneath them, knowing there was no return. That is not courage. That is desperation married to genius. But it is also the beginning of us. Close your eyes, and you can hear them, the whispers of the wind across glaciers, the crack of ice floes colliding, the cries of hunters in pursuit. You can see their firelight, small and flickering against the crushing void of night. You can feel the weight of their fear. Not of failure, not of shame, but of nothingness. Extinction is not abstract when you can count the last handful of dried meat, when you can feel your children weaken beside you. Would you have survived? Would you have pushed forward, deeper into the ice, into the black, into the unknown? Most would not. Most would falter, collapse, welcome the cold as an end. But some, a few, refused to bow. And it is because of them that you sit here now, safe in your heated room, staring at a glowing screen. This opening question is not just a thought experiment. It is a mirror. A reminder that comfort is new, fragile, and built upon bones. The Ice Age was not a place for the weak. It was a crucible, a trial by ice, where only the hardest, most inventive, most unyielding spirits endured. And from that crucible, our story begins. Tonight, you will follow them. Step by step. Hunt by hunt. Across frozen rivers, through endless nights, into storms that could strip the flesh from bone. You will see how they carved tools sharper than teeth, how they tamed fire into a weapon, how they bent nature to their will in ways no other creature dared. And in doing so, you may discover the answer to the question, would you have survived? This is not history as you were taught it. This is not stone tools in a museum, not skeletons laid behind glass. This is blood memory. This is the shadow of your ancestors rising in your veins. And in their footsteps, you will walk, whether you are ready or not. This is the beginning of the story. A story not of kings or empires, but of survival. A story written in frost, in hunger, in firelight and fear. This is the story of us. This is disturbing tale. The world they knew was nothing like the one you stand in now. During the last ice age, the Pleistocene, massive glaciers stretched down from the poles, swallowing whole landscapes. These ice sheets were not passive. They moved like monsters, grinding down mountains, flattening valleys, and dragging forests beneath their crushing weight. Imagine standing at the edge of one, a wall of white that is not snow, but frozen time. The sound is constant, a deep, unearthly groan as the ice shifts, cracking under its own impossible weight. Beneath it, rivers are crushed into silence. Entire valleys vanish. Forests, where birds once sang, are ground into pulp and stone. The glacier does not care if you lived there yesterday. It will not stop for you. It will not remember you. Winters were not a season. They were a rain. Darkness did not fall, it settled, like a king who would not leave his throne. For months, the sky gave no sun, only a pale twilight that offered no warmth. And when the light did return, it was weak, broken, the kind of light that illuminates but does not save. Even summer gave no mercy, a brief, mocking pause before the long night returned to claim its due. The air itself was sharper, denser. To breathe was not relief, but labor. Archaeologists and paleoclimatologists tell us carbon dioxide levels were far lower than they are today, and that single fact reshaped everything. Plants struggled. Grasses were thin, trees sparse. What greenery existed was wiry, bitter, hard to chew. Imagine hunger as a constant presence, not an occasional visitor, but a companion that walked beside you every day of your life. And if hunger was your companion, death was your shadow. Famine was not a storm to weather but the condition of living. The few animals that survived on those plains were both salvation and terror. To look upon them was to see your future written, either in blood warming the snow as you feasted, or in your own corpse stiffening beneath their claws. The mammoth towered above the frozen grasslands, armored in thick fur, its tusks curling like scythes from another world. A single kill could feed a tribe for weeks. Meat, fat, marrow, hide, sinew. But a mammoth was not prey. It was war. To bring it down meant risking everything. Hunters crushed beneath its stamping feet, pierced on the ivory arcs of its tusks. One mistake, one misjudged step in the snow, and the feast became a funeral. Then there were the predators. Saber-toothed cats, Smilodon, waited in silence, their fangs so long they could pierce bone with a single strike. They were not animals to be outrun or outwitted. They were shadows with muscle and teeth, stalking the same herds humans depended on. Cave lions prowled the darkness, larger than any lion you've ever seen. Dire wolves moved in packs across the plains, their jaws built to crush, not tear. And then there was the short-faced bear, taller than a man even on all fours, a predator so massive that when it rose, it seemed to blot out the horizon. These were not stories. Fossil evidence confirms their dominance. The bones we dig from frozen soil, their tooth marks still visible, tell us they ruled across Eurasia and the Americas. Humanity lived beneath their shadow. And yet, humans stood among them. Thin-skinned. Slow-footed. Fragile. Compared to the giants and beasts, humans were laughable, little more than prey that carried sticks. And yet, they were unbroken. That fragility was not weakness. It was disguise. Because beneath it was the single trait that the mammoth did not have, that the saber-toothed cat could not match, that the dire wolf would never understand: persistence. The Ice Age was not kind, but it was honest. It told you every day, you should not be here. You are not built for this place. You are out of time, out of place, out of hope. And still, humanity answered with fire. With stone. With will. Think of what it meant to survive even one winter. Your clothes were not woven fabric, but hides, scraped clean with stone blades, stitched with sinew. If you were careless in preparing them, the cold found its way through the seams and burned you alive from the inside. Your shelter was not a house of walls and glass, but a fragile structure of bones and hides, creaking in the wind, snow piling against its sides. And always, the fire. Fire was not warmth. It was your soul. Without it, the dark consumed you. But fire came with a cost. Smoke could give you away. The scent of meat roasting over flame carried into the distance, and not only to your friends. A wolf could smell it from miles away. A lion, from further still. The same flame that kept you alive also called your enemies. To eat was to risk. To live was to gamble. Now pause. Close your eyes. Picture yourself there. Strip away your heating, your light bulbs, your walls, your phone. What is left? Your body, brittle in the cold. Your breath, misting white in the air. Your hands, blistered, bleeding, gripping stone. Could you have survived one night in that crucible of ice? Our ancestors did. Not once. Not twice. But for thousands of years. Every step they took was against the will of the world. And yet they endured. They adapted. They became sharper than the stone they carved, harder than the ice they crossed, more relentless than the predators that stalked them. The Ice Age was the crucible. And out of it, humanity was forged. Hunger was the first teacher. It was relentless. It was merciless. It was the voice that stripped away illusion and comfort, that spoke not in words but in the hollow ache of an empty belly. To our Ice Age ancestors, hunger was not an occasional visitor. It was a permanent companion, gnawing at their insides, tightening its grip with every failed hunt, every frozen stream, every withered root pulled from the frozen ground. When the land failed, people did not have the luxury to wait. They could not say, perhaps tomorrow will be better. Tomorrow meant death. To hesitate was to vanish, and hunger made certain that hesitation never lasted long. It demanded innovation. It demanded risk. It demanded transformation. Stone tools became their lifeline. What began as crude shards struck from flint evolved into blades sharp enough to slice through hide and flesh. A rock was no longer just a rock, it became a knife, a weapon, a ticket to another day of life. Spears, hardened in fire until their tips could pierce hide, gave distance between hunter and beast. To wield one was to gamble your fragile body against creatures built for killing. Scrapers shaved animal skins into clothing. The cold could peel the life from your bones faster than hunger ever could, and bare flesh had no defense. But with tools of stone, ancestors scraped hides clean, softened them, and stitched them into garments. Archaeologists have uncovered bone needles, slivers sharpened with precision, used to pierce hides and thread sinew. This was not improvisation. This was mastery. These were not crude wrappings tied in desperation but layered garments, tunics, leggings, boots, cloaks. Fashioned not for beauty, but for survival. Clothing was the difference between a frozen corpse on the ice and a body that lived to see the faint light of another pale sun. And where no wood grew, where the treeless expanses stretched endlessly, bones became shelter. Imagine the world reduced to endless white, the horizon stretching in every direction with no forest to cut, no timber to burn. What do you build with when the world gives you nothing? You build with the dead. Entire dwellings have been unearthed built from the bones of mammoths, rib cages arched into frames, tusks lashed together as beams, skulls stacked into walls. Over these skeletal structures, hides were stretched, fur pressed into seams, turning death into architecture. Inside those bone houses, families huddled around embers. The walls themselves were the ghosts of beasts they had killed. Each gust of wind rattled tusks. Each crack of ice outside echoed against a shelter made of carcasses. It was grim. It was desperate. But it worked. Picture it, a mother stitching fur by firelight, the sinew thread sticky with grease, the bone needle passing in and out of skin. A child sits close, silent, his belly growling so loudly it seems to fill the hut. Outside, the father sharpens a flint blade, knowing that when dawn comes, he must lead the hunt again. Because if he fails, even once, the family will not see another winter. Every tool, every stitch, every fire was a gamble. Fail once, and the entire bloodline ended. That is the truth of the Ice Age, every small mistake echoed into extinction. To fumble flint against stone meant no blade to cut meat. To miss a stitch meant frostbite seeping into skin. To let fire go out meant a night of suffering that could kill the weakest in hours. Survival was not routine. It was a series of wagers against death. And death was always watching. And yet, they endured. Why? Because hunger, merciless as it was, sharpened them. It carved them into something new. It forced them to see not just what was in front of them, but what could be. Where others saw stone, they saw a knife. Where others saw bones, they saw a house. Where others saw a carcass, they saw warmth and fire. Hunger taught them to imagine survival before it existed. It also taught them unity. Hunger had no patience for the solitary. A single hunter with a flint blade was no match for a mammoth's tusk or a lion's teeth. But together, with spears angled and voices raised, a tribe could become something terrifying, a force that even predators hesitated to challenge. Archaeological sites reveal coordinated hunts, animals herded into swamps, cliffs, and traps, their massive bodies brought down not by strength but by cunning. Still, even with strategy, each hunt was a dance with death. Imagine the charge of a mammoth, its tonnage shaking the frozen ground, tusks swinging wide like scythes. Spears pierce its hide, but still it runs, trampling anything in its path. Hunters scream, dodge, strike again. Some are crushed. Some are gored. Victory is not triumph. Victory is survival. When the beast finally falls, the earth itself seems to tremble. And then comes the work of butchery, of carving, of carrying. Nothing is wasted, meat to eat, bones for tools, sinew for thread, hide for clothing, fat for fuel. The animal lives on in their survival, and in their shelters. But hunger never let them forget the cost. Even after a successful kill, the hunger would return, gnawing again, reminding them that the fight was never over. One kill was not enough. One garment was not enough. Firewood burned away. Meat spoiled. Ice reclaimed everything. Hunger always returned. And so they learned to prepare, to think beyond the moment. They dug pits in the frozen earth to store meat. They smoked flesh over fire to dry it, preserving it against decay. They cached bones and hides for times of famine. Hunger forced them to invent the very concept of the future, to act now for a tomorrow they might not live to see. Even religion may have been born of hunger. When survival was so fragile, when each hunt was a gamble with death, the idea of spirits, of forces guiding success or punishing failure, may have risen naturally. Shamans scattered bones in ritual, painted hunts on cave walls, sang to forces unseen. Whether real or imagined, these acts gave meaning to the hunger, shaping culture itself from the empty belly. Hunger was cruel. Hunger was merciless. But hunger was the greatest teacher of all. It taught humans to use the dead as walls, to turn stone into weapons, to shape sinew into thread. It taught them to hunt giants and to defy predators that should have devoured them. It demanded cunning, unity, and foresight. And in answering its lessons, humans became more than fragile animals. They became survivors. And you, listening now, imagining the gnaw in your own belly, the hollow dark outside your shelter, ask yourself this. Would you have endured its lessons? Would you have fed your fire, stitched your clothing, sharpened your blade? Or would hunger have erased you, as it erased so many? This was the crucible of survival. And the price of every mistake was extinction. For many, the sea was the final wall. It was the horizon that taunted them, a line where the earth seemed to end, where sky and water blended into a single void. For those who lived through the crucible of the Ice Age, this was not a barrier painted blue on a map. It was alive. The ocean was a predator, one vast, endless, hungering mouth that swallowed entire families without mercy. And yet, they faced it. Archaeological discoveries have shattered old certainties. For decades, scholars assumed our ancestors hugged coasts, waiting until the last possible moment to brave the water. But stone tools, sharp, flaked obsidian, uncovered on Crete tell a different story. They date back more than 130,000 years, at a time when the island was surrounded entirely by water. That means humans were building boats long before we believed such things were possible. These were not idle journeys. They were deliberate, calculated risks, evidence of minds both desperate and daring. Then there is Australia. The very existence of its first peoples tells us the story. To reach its shores, humans had to cross stretches of open ocean at least 50 miles wide. No bridges of land connected them. No safety net existed. Imagine it, rafts of bound wood and stretched hides, creaking as salt water hissed against them. Families crouched low, clinging to each other, staring into waves that rose taller than forests. There were no compasses, no stars neatly charted in books. Only instinct, the movement of the sun, the feel of the wind. And always, the gnawing whisper of hunger pushing them forward. These were not ships of safety. They were crude, fragile things, stitched hide stretched over bone frames, hollowed logs burned and carved with fire, bundles of reeds lashed together with sinew. The sea toyed with them. One sudden storm, one rogue wave, and they were splintered apart, bodies scattered across the tide. And storms always came. Without warning. Clouds thickened, blotting out the sky. Wind lashed salt against skin until the fires they had carried, little embers cradled in clay jars or wrapped in bark, hissed and died in the spray. With no fire, there was no warmth, no food, no protection. Some boats simply never reached land. Their stories ended in silence, in water graves where bones dissolved and memories vanished. But others did not turn back. Others pushed forward. Because behind them was famine. The land was failing. Herds moved on. Forests died under advancing ice. To stay was to starve. Ahead lay possibility, islands rich with shellfish, new hunting grounds, rivers that had never known the spear of man. To step into one of those boats was not an act of curiosity. It was an act of surrender to the unknown. It was to accept death as a companion, to carry it with you like another passenger. The sea demanded sacrifice, and they gave it willingly, because survival demanded nothing less. Picture it now. A raft of 6 souls, pushed into the waves at dawn. A father steadying the vessel with his hands raw from rope. A mother clutching a child to her chest, whispering songs that could not silence the scream of the wind. A hunter kneeling, paddle in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon though he knows nothing waits for him but chance. And beneath them, the sea churns, vast, endless, alive. Hours blur into days. Salt cracks their lips. Skin peels. Their water jars run low. They begin to drink rain when it comes, holding out hides to catch drops before they vanish into the swell. Some vomit from the rolling of the waves, their bodies too fragile to endure. The child whimpers, then quiets, then grows too silent. Each moment stretches into eternity. Each stroke of the paddle is another defiance against an enemy too large to comprehend. And then, land. A shadow on the horizon. A ridge of rock. Trees, faintly visible against the sky. Imagine the cry that rose from those boats when they saw it. Imagine the last desperate push, the way the water fought to keep them, dragging at their vessel until the sand finally met its bottom. Crawling ashore, skin pale, limbs shaking, but alive. They had beaten the sea. For one night, one moment, the predator had not won. But victory was never final. The next crossing always waited. Across the Red Sea, early humans pressed on, leaving Africa for Arabia. Across the Bering Strait, they marched and sailed, bridging continents. Each crossing rewrote destiny. Each boat carried not just bodies but the very future of humankind. Without them, there would be no Australia, no Europe, no Americas. Civilization itself is built on the bones of those who dared to paddle into endless waters. The terror of the sea never truly left us. Even now, thousands of years later, with engines, steel hulls, and satellites, we fear its depths. Storms still swallow ships. Waves still drag souls down into silence. The ocean has not changed. Only we have. And yet, in those fragile crossings of hide and bone, our ancestors proved something profound, that survival was not about strength, or speed, or teeth like sabers. It was about will, the refusal to yield, even to the vastness of the unknown. The sea was never conquered. It was endured. And endurance was enough. The land that waited on the other side was no paradise. It was the Arctic. A desert of ice where the ground itself was locked in permafrost, where no tree grew, where silence pressed down on the mind until it became unbearable. To step into this world was to step into an environment that seemed designed to erase human existence. No fertile valleys. No lush forests. No soft earth to till or harvest. Only ice, wind, and the endless echo of nothingness. And yet, they stayed. Fire was no longer just warmth. It was no longer just light. In this frozen abyss, it became a living god, fragile, demanding, and never to be abandoned. Families carried it as if it were a newborn child. A smoldering ember, cupped in bark, shielded with hide, wrapped against rain, against snow, against howling wind. This ember traveled with them from camp to camp, across miles of frozen ground, through nights that seemed eternal. It was never allowed to die. For if it did, they would follow. Imagine the terror, a blizzard rising in the dead of night, the ember flickering low, hands fumbling in the cold, breath freezing in the air. If the fire went out, there was no second chance. The Arctic gave nothing for free. Dry wood was a dream. Everything was wet, frozen, or locked away beneath ice. To restart flame from nothing was near impossible. So the ember had to live, guarded like treasure, carried like legacy. Fire became bloodline. Without it, there was only darkness. In this place, naked flesh was death. Animal skins were not luxury, but armor. The hides of reindeer, the thick coats of wolves, the insulating fat of seals. Each layer became a barrier against the cold that clawed at every pore. These were not crude wrappings. Archaeological evidence tells us they sewed, tailored, stitched with bone needles, crafting garments designed for -40-degree nights. Every stitch was survival. Every thread meant the difference between life and frozen death. Some families wore double or triple layers, inner hides for warmth, outer hides for resistance against snow and water. Boots were stuffed with dried grasses for insulation. Gloves and mittens were made from the pelts of small animals, their fur facing inward against skin. The cold was relentless. To step outside improperly clothed was not discomfort, it was execution. Fingers blackened. Noses withered. Skin cracked until it bled, then froze, then shattered. The people learned quickly that the body itself had limits, but ingenuity could stretch those limits further than nature allowed. In the Arctic, there were no fields. No orchards. No grain. Food was hunted, wrestled from the ice, carved from the flesh of beasts that were more dangerous than the people who pursued them. Holes were cut into frozen rivers, yielding fish beneath the ice. Each catch was a miracle. The fat of seals became not only food but light, burned in stone lamps that flickered through long nights. Walruses, hunted with harpoons tipped with bone, provided both meat and fat, but they did not die easily. These were battles, not hunts, human against beast, survival against the sea. A misstep could mean being crushed beneath tusks, dragged into the freezing water, or left broken on the ice. And then there were the mammoths. Mammoth hunts were not the act of a single hunter, but of entire communities. Children, women, men, all participated. Fires were lit, torches waved, stones hurled, spears flung. The goal was not to kill quickly, but to drive the massive creature toward traps, cliffs, or patches of treacherous ice. To kill one mammoth was to feed a clan for weeks. But it was also to risk annihilation. A charging mammoth could crush bone like dry twigs. Many surely died in these hunts, but the alternative was certain: starvation. Every bite of food carried death within it, the death of an animal, the death risked by the hunter, the constant reminder that survival was a trade, not a gift. And then, the homes. In a land where no tree grew, humans built from what they killed. Archaeologists have uncovered entire dwellings constructed from mammoth ribs and tusks, lashed together with hide, draped with fur, covered in snow for insulation. These were bone houses. Imagine stepping into one. The walls themselves were the skeletons of monsters. The roof, layered with hides still carrying the musk of animal fat, creaked against the wind. Inside, families huddled close, bodies pressed together, embers glowing at the center, shadows rising against curved bone like ghosts of the beasts they had slain. It was fragile, always fragile. But it was enough. Enough to keep out the wind, enough to preserve life for another night. The cold was not a season here, it was eternity. Nights lasted weeks. The sun disappeared, replaced by a sky so black it seemed bottomless. The stars were the only witnesses, staring down with indifference. Every breath was a battle. Air sliced into lungs like knives. Skin blistered, cracked, bled, then froze. Sleep became dangerous, for in the numbness of dreams, the body forgot to shiver. Many never woke. The Arctic did not need predators. The land itself hunted them. The silence pressed so heavily that it became unbearable, gnawing at sanity. A family might survive the hunger, the storms, the hunts, and yet lose themselves to the weight of endless darkness. It was not only a battle of body, but of mind. The great question is not how they suffered, it is how they stayed. Why not turn back? Why not seek softer lands, warmer suns, easier life? Because behind them was hunger. Behind them was competition, rival tribes, dwindling resources. To retreat was death. To remain was death. Only forward held even the faintest promise of survival. And so they stayed. They built. They endured. This is perhaps the greatest testament of our species, not our intelligence, not our strength, but our ability to look at a land that should have been impossible, and whisper, "We will not leave." Every ember carried, every needle pierced through hide, every harpoon thrust into a seal's flesh, every bone house lashed together with sinew, it was all defiance. The Arctic night pressed in, eternal and merciless. And yet humanity refused to vanish. That was the Arctic. That was the crucible. And those who endured there, were changed forever. But survival was never only about flesh and bone. It was not only about the spear in the hunt, or the fire that kept the predators away. Something else was happening in the silence of the caves, in the dim glow of fires that hissed and spat against the darkness. Humanity was becoming something more. They were not only surviving the cold, they were shaping it into meaning. They were transforming existence into story. In the stillness, shadows danced across stone walls, flickering forms that became more than mere illusions of firelight. In those shadows, the first myths were born. Hunters became giants. Beasts became spirits. The wind that howled outside was not just wind, it was a voice, perhaps a warning, perhaps a god. Archaeologists, digging into the earth, have unearthed evidence that proves this transformation was deliberate. The tools of survival, scrapers, knives, needles, were joined by something else. By beads carved from ivory, strung together into necklaces that had no hunting use. By pendants made from the teeth of animals, worn not because they were useful, but because they meant something. They told a story of courage, of triumph, of belonging to a world larger than the individual. Burials, too, became different. Some graves were not simple pits in the dirt. They were painted with red ochre, a pigment that symbolized blood, rebirth, or perhaps fire itself. Bodies were carefully arranged, sometimes surrounded by tools, sometimes adorned with beads, as if the dead would need these objects in another life. This was not mere disposal of corpses. This was ritual. This was the beginning of belief. And in this belief, humanity discovered its greatest weapon, community. The cold of the Ice Age was unrelenting. Nights stretched into weeks. Winters consumed entire years. Alone, no one could survive it. But together, bound by shared stories and shared rituals, they endured. Around the fire, myths were told and retold until they became truths. A boy grew up hearing that the mammoth was not only prey but also guardian, spirit, ancestor. A girl learned that the fire was not just flame but a living being that had to be fed and protected. These stories were not decoration, they were survival strategies disguised as meaning. To believe in the spirit of the hunt meant discipline, reverence, cooperation. To bury the dead with care reinforced the bond of the living. To paint a cave wall with the image of bison or lion was to declare, before the tribe and before the gods, that the hunt would succeed. Consider the caves of Chauvet, Lascaux, Altamira. Inside, beneath layers of earth and darkness, archaeologists have found walls alive with movement, horses running, mammoths trumpeting, lions stalking. These were not crude doodles. These were masterpieces, dynamic, deliberate, meant to capture not just the appearance but the essence of the animal. In some places, torchlight would make the drawings flicker, creating the illusion of movement, of a living hunt unfolding on the stone. This was cinema before cinema. This was magic before magic. And yet, it was more than art. It was ritual. By painting the bison, the hunter believed he had already taken part in the kill. By drawing the lion, he tamed its spirit before meeting it face to face. The cave became a sacred theater of survival, where imagination and reality blurred into one. But culture was not only painted on stone. It was sung, it was spoken, it was danced. Music, too, has left its traces. Flutes carved from bird bone, with carefully drilled holes, have been found in sites dating back over 40,000 years. Imagine the sound, thin, haunting, rising in the icy air of a cave where men and women huddled together for warmth. The music was not entertainment. It was connection. A melody could bind a group tighter than fear. A rhythm could make a hunt, a ritual, a burial into something more than a task. It became an act of meaning. What is remarkable is that these people, pressed against the edge of extinction, invested their precious time in symbols, in stories, in song. They chose to imagine even when hunger gnawed at their bellies. They chose to decorate even when death pressed close. Why? Because survival without meaning is no survival at all. This is the paradox of humanity. The very act of telling stories is what gave them the strength to keep going. Without myth, there is despair. With myth, there is purpose. And purpose can feed the soul long enough for the body to find food. Even language itself, still shrouded in mystery, emerged as a survival tool disguised as poetry. To coordinate a hunt, to warn of danger, to teach the young which plants were poison and which roots could be eaten, words were needed. But once the words existed, they did not remain chained to utility. They grew wings. They became chants, songs, poems whispered to the fire, prayers sent to the dark. The Arctic cold did not break them. It sculpted them. In the bleakest winters, they invented culture. And slowly, this culture became a shield as strong as any spear, as vital as any fire. To believe was to endure. To tell stories was to resist despair. To create symbols was to claim that life, even in the most merciless conditions, had meaning. Perhaps this is the deepest truth of the Ice Age, that humanity's greatest adaptation was not the tool, not the fire, not even the hunt. It was imagination. It was belief. It was culture. Because when the cold stripped everything away, when the body trembled on the edge of death, it was story that whispered, "Endure a little longer." It was song that said, "We are together." It was ritual that promised, "This is not the end." Without culture, they might have survived for a season. With it, they survived an age. The story of survival is written not only in fire-scorched caves or frozen bones, but deep within us. Inside the double helix of our DNA lies the echo of every risk taken, every step across ice and sea, every night spent clinging to embers against a world determined to erase us. The journey of our ancestors is not history confined to textbooks, it is biology, memory, and inheritance intertwined. Genetic studies have illuminated a truth that early humans themselves could scarcely have imagined. The crossing of the Bering Land Bridge, Beringia, was more than a migration. It was an act of audacious defiance against extinction. Tens of thousands of years ago, men, women, and children trudged across a frozen corridor stretching hundreds of miles, ice and sea locked in a dangerous embrace, into lands unknown. Some were driven by hunger, others by climate, some perhaps by instinct alone. Behind them, the ice threatened to crush, to swallow, to erase. Ahead, the horizon promised uncertainty, storms, predators, and the cold so brutal it could hollow a child's chest in minutes. Yet they pressed forward. Each step across continents was etched into DNA. Markers from these ancient migrations can still be found today, in the peoples of Siberia, in the indigenous populations of the Americas, in the patterns of European genes. These sequences are silent testaments to courage, resilience, and persistence. They are survival's fingerprints. Consider this: the same genes that allowed our ancestors to metabolize fat-rich diets in frigid climates, to digest foods scarce in tropical nutrients, or to tolerate low oxygen at high altitudes, exist in us today. Each adaptation was a gamble, a mutation that either preserved a life or doomed it. Countless variations failed. Countless families vanished before leaving a trace. Yet the ones that survived carried forward the possibility of you, of me, of every human who draws breath now. And it wasn't only biology. As early humans spread across the world, they carried with them ideas, myths, rituals, and practices. Each language, each song, each symbol carved into stone or bone was a seed planted in human consciousness. Some of these seeds took root, evolving over millennia into culture, spirituality, and society. Others were lost, silenced by famine, predators, ice, or disease, but even in their absence, they shaped the evolution of groups that remained. We are walking archives of their journeys, their choices, their defiance of the impossible. Every heartbeat is an echo of a tribe that dared to cross the ice. Every breath is a gift won from ancestors who clutched fire in the teeth of darkness. But the story of legacy is not a story of triumph alone. For every individual who survived, countless others were lost. Archaeological sites tell fragmented tales. Children buried beside mothers whose skin never saw warmth again, fishermen whose bodies were swallowed by waves while crossing frozen straits, entire bands of families crushed beneath the weight of a glacier or scattered by predator attacks in the night. The Dolní Věstonice site in the Czech Republic reveals the tragic scale of loss. Hundreds of human remains, layered with red ochre, show a population that struggled with famine, disease, and harsh winters. Venus figurines carved from mammoth ivory suggest both the fragility of life and the desperate hope placed in fertility and protection, rituals performed in recognition that the forces of nature were always larger, always crueler than human intention. At the same time, burials in Siberia and Alaska reveal meticulous care, graves lined with tools, animal teeth, and clothing, suggesting that even in death, survival remained paramount, at least in spirit. Those who did not survive were mourned, remembered, perhaps even honored in myth and story, their absence shaping the behaviors of the living. Each lost life represents a gamble that failed. Each surviving lineage is a gamble that succeeded. And it is because of the success of some that you exist today. Every crossing, every hunt, every fire lit in the dark was a declaration: we refuse to vanish. It was not strength alone that carried humanity across ice sheets, mountains, and seas. It was persistence, foresight, cooperation, and ingenuity. Humans had to calculate risks, anticipate storms, fashion tools from bones and stones, and communicate in ways we may never fully understand. Every boat that did not capsize, every spear that did not shatter, every shelter that withstood wind and snow was a step toward legacy. The crossings were epic. The Red Sea, the Bering Strait, the Arctic expanses of Siberia, all became. With no maps, no compasses, no knowledge of what lay beyond, they relied on stars, currents, animal patterns, and intuition. And sometimes, the gamble failed. Whole groups disappeared into the sea or ice. But when it worked, humanity reached new continents, new climates, and new challenges, always carrying with them the accumulated knowledge of survival. This is why genetic and archaeological evidence speaks in tandem. The spread of Homo sapiens across the globe cannot be understood as random migration. It was strategy, innovation, and courage inscribed in DNA, etched into bones, painted on cave walls, and carried in every ember that survived the night. Look around today. The languages you hear, the foods you eat, the clothing you wear, the way your mind organizes space and time, all bear echoes of these journeys. The tools you consider modern are, at their core, descendants of the flint knives, bone harpoons, and sewn hides that enabled humans to survive the Arctic night. Your community structures, rituals, and myths are extensions of the culture born in those bone shelters, around fires that refuse to die. This inheritance is heavy. It is not simply a tale of pride, it is a warning and a reminder. Humanity owes its very existence to people who were willing to risk everything, who gambled not for glory, not for kingdoms, not for legacy, but for the bare chance to see another day. Without their courage, the line ends. Without their risk, you would not exist. And still, the cost was vast. For every tribe that survived, many did not. Children frozen in the arms of their mothers, fathers lost on ice bridges, elders devoured by storms or beasts, these silent casualties built the path to our present. Their sacrifice is invisible in everyday life, but their influence is indelible in our genes, our cultures, and our ability to endure. Consider that. Every choice, every gamble, every fire lit in desperation, every spear thrust into ice or snow, every journey across a frozen landscape, every song sung into the Arctic night, it all led to you. You are not a coincidence. You are the culmination of survival, defiance, and ingenuity. It is a legacy written in cold and fire. Written in the tremble of hands against frostbite, in the laughter and tears of communities clinging together in the dark, in the stories whispered to children to give them courage when their bellies ached and their toes went numb. You are their inheritance. Their victory. Their message to the future, we endured, and so may you. Yet the legacy is conditional. You exist because they dared, because they imagined, because they refused to give in. The Arctic night, the crossing seas, the frozen rivers, the predatory plains, all were challenges that separated survival from extinction. That lesson remains: the flame of life must always be protected, nurtured, and passed on. And as you breathe today, in warmth, in safety, in a world that gives you comfort they never knew, remember that you owe your existence to the gamble of strangers, of ancestors whose names are lost but whose genes persist, whose courage flows through every cell in your body. They carried the weight of survival in a way you may never truly comprehend, but it is yours now to honor. This is the legacy in our blood. A warning, a lesson, a claim: survival is never free. It is never certain. It is always earned. You are alive because someone else refused to stop moving. You walk because someone else clutched fire in the dark. You speak because someone else whispered to children while the Arctic night pressed in. This is the truth: without them, none of us would be here. And so we return to the question that hangs like a shadow over every story of survival: would you have survived? The question is deceptively simple. It asks nothing more than a yes or no. Yet the answer demands more than imagination. It demands empathy, courage, and the cold light of reality. Imagine stepping onto a frozen shore, where the sea stretches black and infinite before you, and the wind is not a whisper but a blade slicing through your lungs. In your arms, a child shivers, fingers blue, eyes wide with fear you cannot ease. Behind you, the land lies barren, nothing to eat, nothing to shelter you, nothing but the threat of starvation and predators too patient and powerful to even notice your weakness. Before you, only uncertainty. Only the ocean, roiling, jagged, indifferent. Could you have made that choice? To step into the unknown, to risk your life for the possibility that your bloodline might continue? To gamble everything on a fragile skin boat, a fire smoldering between your hands, your only hope a whisper of courage carried in your mind and your heart? This was the crucible of humanity. Across continents, through glaciers, over seas, humans confronted a world that seemed designed to crush them. Archaeology and genetics confirm it. Obsidian tools, dating back over 130,000 years, testify to early seafaring. Fossils and ice cores reveal famines that stretched generations, winters that could last months without sunlight, climates that turned forests into deserts, rivers into ice, and the seas into deadly corridors. Every mile traveled was a step into danger. Every decision a negotiation with death itself. And yet, they moved. They moved because there was no other choice. Standing still meant extinction. To turn back meant hunger and freezing nights. To hesitate was to invite predators: saber-toothed cats, cave lions, dire wolves, mammoths, and bears that did not pause to consider mercy. Survival demanded motion, and motion demanded courage that modern humans can barely imagine. In those desperate crossings, every stroke of a paddle was an act of defiance. Every fire carried across ice and sea was a miracle. Every spear hurled into the flank of a mammoth or walrus was a gamble with mortality. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of coordinated hunts, strategies born of necessity, cooperation, and intelligence, proving that survival was never solitary. They depended on each other because alone, none would have lasted. Their ingenuity was the weapon that transformed fear into possibility. Their intelligence turned scarcity into innovation. Their community turned fragility into resilience. Even when death came, and it always came for some, those who survived carried their lessons forward. A lost sibling, a vanished parent, a family swallowed by storm or ice, these were tragedies that shaped those who remained. They carried knowledge of predator patterns, of hunting strategies, of winter survival techniques, of safe crossings, of places to find food and shelter. Every loss was a teacher, every death a lesson etched into the minds of the living. And this is where the true terror, and the true brilliance, resides. Survival was never guaranteed. There was no safety, no divine favor, no room for error. The margin between life and oblivion was microscopic. The first frostbite could be fatal. The wrong step on a frozen river could plunge a family into icy death. The night could last weeks. Storms could erase entire bands. And yet, humanity endured. They endured because they refused to surrender. Because they valued possibility over despair. Because even in the bleakest, coldest, most merciless landscapes, they recognized something worth fighting for, life itself. Not for glory, not for fame, not for monuments to their courage, but for the next generation, the next breath, the next heartbeat. They endured for you. They endured for us. Their fire still burns. Not in caves, not in bone and hide shelters, not in flint and obsidian tools. But in the very essence of what makes us human. In every beat of our hearts. In every gasp of breath we take in warmth and abundance. In the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of struggle. Their survival is encoded in our DNA, in our genes, in our instincts. Every adaptation they made, every risk they took, every night they clung to life in the teeth of darkness is alive within us. Your existence is borrowed. It is a gift won through unimaginable trials. Your ancestors gambled everything against freezing seas, blinding storms, the jaws of predators, and the emptiness of barren lands, and they prevailed. And so, when you sit in comfort, when you breathe without thought of frostbite or famine, when you eat without fear of starvation, remember that you are standing on the shoulders of those who endured the unimaginable. Yet the haunting truth remains, not everyone survived. Whole tribes vanished without a trace. Children froze in the arms of their mothers. Fathers disappeared on ice bridges, lost to the wind and snow. Families were split by storms and predators, never to reunite. The Arctic, the seas, the mountains, and the glaciers claimed countless lives. Their voices are silent, their names lost. And yet, the echoes of their struggle resonate in you. Every gene you carry, every thought, every survival instinct, is a testament to those who defied annihilation. To honor them is not merely to remember, but to act. To understand that survival, endurance, and courage are not relics of the past, but living legacies. To comprehend that your life, your choices, your very being, is inseparable from theirs. You inherit not only their genes but their lessons, to move when standing still kills, to fight when surrender is easier, to imagine when the darkness offers only despair. This is not just history. This is your origin. Every heartbeat you take is a continuation of their gamble. Every decision you make is a reflection of their defiance. Every story you tell, every fire you light, every child you raise, these are acts of continuity, of remembrance, of survival. So when you ask yourself, would I have survived, know the answer already. You have. Not because of your strength, not because of luck, but because of theirs. Because somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, someone decided that ending was not an option. Because they walked through storms, across ice, and over seas that should have killed them. Because they clutched fire like a living thing, because they trusted each other, because they dared. And through them, you exist. Their story is the most disturbing tale of all, not merely because of the horrors they endured, but because it is the foundation of your existence. Their sacrifices, their innovations, their courage, and their unyielding defiance are the blood in your veins, the spark in your mind, the inheritance of every human heartbeat that follows. And now, the choice is yours. Will you honor them? Will you carry their story forward, through memory, through knowledge, through action? Or will you turn away, indifferent, silent, like those lost in snow and sea, leaving their efforts unacknowledged? If you value this inheritance, subscribe to Disturbing Tale. Carry the fire forward. Tell their story. Examine the blood, ice, and shadows that formed the world in which humanity survived. Do not let their courage vanish into silence, as so many voices already have. Because if you turn away now, if you walk from this tale without acknowledgement, you are no different from the countless ancestors who disappeared into the Arctic night, forgotten and unremembered. But if you listen, truly listen, if you feel their struggle as it pulses in your own blood, if you grasp the magnitude of the gamble they took to ensure your life, then you become more than a spectator. You become part of the chain of survival. Part of a legacy that began with fire, stone, and ice, and continues through every heartbeat today. And so the fire burns still. Across millennia, across oceans, across continents, it burns. In you. In me. In every life that walks this earth. It is a fire born from endurance, sacrifice, courage, and defiance. Would you have survived the Ice Age? The answer is yes, but only because of them. Your life, your breath, your story, these are theirs. And their story is, without question, the most disturbing tale of survival humanity has ever known.